Arriving at a place of independence from 1948, Burma, also known as Myanmar, has been ever since embattled with constant military coups, with military juntas, also impacting the ongoing geopolitical situation there. Indigenous people groups facing extreme repression, suppression, and persecution, many of which are specifically Christian groups like the Quran. Also other indigenous states within Burma, the Chin and Kaya groupings facing extreme persecution, particularly for their predominant profession of faith in Jesus. I'm Regan King, and this evening on the Persecuted Church, my co-host and good friend Alistair Scott and I will be discussing the Persecuted Church in Burma. Alistair, good evening.
Good evening.
Tell us a little bit about your understanding of the situation in Myanmar, or Burma as it has previously been called.
Well, it's like you said, it's been one of these where the leadership has changed so much. And again, I think most people think of Burma because you think of the Burmese War and all those sort of things two generations ago, and you think them as Buddhists and being a fairly peaceful place, but it's anything but. And for Christians particularly, I think we said this in several programs before, we are, as Christians, we seem to be the most persecuted of the persecuted people. We seem to be the lowest of or the highest list on the list of extreme persecution. And we see that in Burma, or Myanmar as we now refer to it, that the Christians are having to be so strong and courageous in their faith to survive, because we're seeing church buildings being ransacked, burned down, just similar to what we've seen in other Islamic nations. But I think most people might be a little bit surprised that Christians are so highly persecuted in a place that we've seen as Burma, Myanmar, and having to fight for survival there. So again, it's one of those very important places. We see this world watch list of the most dangerous places. It's in the top 20. I think it's about number 13, if I remember rightly. So it's very high on the list. So for us as believers, we really do need to understand how important it is for not only to make people aware of this, but also to be praying into situations and praying for strength for those leadership people. We've got a few interviews today which show stories that will probably surprise most people who watch this program. But it's a challenging time for Christianity around the world. But the Bible warns us of these times, where there'll be nations rising against nations, where there'll be persecution, all these difficult things. But God is for His people in Myanmar, Burma, as He is in every other nation. We got to just pray for perseverance. In the midst of persecution, they persevere and continue to proclaim the gospel, because the gospel is the hope of this nation as it is for any other nation.
Absolutely. Now, Myanmar has a significant population of over 54 million people. It's quite incredible. And the statistics of the latest census put there being 4,760,000 followers of Jesus Christ there. But the Christian community in Burma consider this figure far too low, because the counting was not carried out in one of the main hubs for Christians in Burma, in the Christian majority Kachin state. So it could be significantly more than that. There are 2,123,000 Muslims, and of course there has been some press coverage of the plight of Muslims in Burma. The Rohingya, which are there, have been covered extensively. What's often not covered is what about the Christians who are in that grouping. They are, as a minority within a minority, even more persecuted, which is tragic. There are over 40,603,000 Buddhists, 5,159,000 adhere to other animistic tribal type beliefs. So it's quite a varied situation. There's others there, including apparently 34 Jewish individuals in Myanmar, which is fascinating. I'll have to look more into that one myself. But there's the reality that many Christians are being driven out of their homes. They're being forced to find refuge in churches and displacement camps. I have had experience and contact with people from Burma, particularly of the Karen, the Mon, and the Chin and Kachin states for a number of years, almost the entirety of the time that I've lived in the United Kingdom, all of them reporting extreme war crimes that have been committed against their people. There was a brief reprieve. It felt like a brief reprieve when this people's heroine, basically Aung San Suu Kyi, came to power, swiftly overthrown after years of being a political prisoner and in exile. She was overthrown, and there was also a great deal of dissatisfaction even among her supporters with some of how her government was run. And so it's just been this constant military junta back and forth. CBN has a helpful breakdown of what's been going on, particularly in relation to these deadly attacks that have escalated against Myanmar or Burma's Christians.
The military junta in Myanmar, also known as Burma, is intensifying its attacks against Christians and other ethnic minorities. Chuck Holton recently witnessed the brutal crackdown, which included airstrikes and artillery assaults on Christian civilians. He brings us this report as he accompanied the Free Burma Rangers into the combat zone.
Deep in the mountains of eastern Burma, gunfire echoes through Christian villages. The Burmese army is driving thousands from their homes as it seeks to crush opposition to the 2021 coup. Rebel armies, though, are slowly liberating village after village.
Right now we are attacking to Loiko, the capital city of the Karen state. Before that, the Burma army put in their troops surround Loiko because Loiko is the main command center of all their troops. So we are right now attacking to Loiko, their main center. So we are pushing them back. So they have to fall back all the time.
For years, the Burmese army has committed atrocities against civilians, deliberately targeting churches and other religious sites. The people living in these villages in the mountains of Burma still live pretty primitive lives. You can tell by the huts that they live in. They're just made of split bamboo. Most of them don't have electricity or running water. And so you might be surprised to find a giant Baptist church built on the top of the hill in this very remote place in the mountains of Burma. But that's because most of these hill tribes are actually Christian. They were converted to Christianity by the very first Baptist missionary, Adoniram Judson, in the end of the 19th century. And that's one of the reasons why there has been this conflict ongoing between them and the Buddhist military junta who controls the country.
This church and this village lost over 100 homes burned and destroyed, and over 100 landmines found, including in the church property, including in the church.
Despite the danger, the NGO called the Free Burma Rangers is using its resources to evacuate civilians and deliver life-saving relief. During the mission, Burmese MiG fighter jets supplied by Russia hunted the group.
So we have a recon plane flying over, trying to find this convoy, I'm pretty sure. We've been going this all day. Normally when they fly, after that will come airstrikes, airplanes. And then these planes can also drop mortars.
Many of the minority groups have taken up arms, resisting the dictatorship for decades. Now, their aging weaponry is no match for the junta's modern arsenal. So this is an M16A1 rifle, and you can tell how old it is by looking at all the bluing is rubbed off of the upper here. And these things were probably left behind at the end of the Vietnam War. That's how old they are. But you can tell, if you look inside here, that the chamber is clean and well oiled. These guys, this is life or death for them, and so they take very good care of their weapons. As the conflict rages, these resilient ethnic groups remain determined to resist military rule, and many believe the goal is finally in reach.
Well, a big thank you again from, as we often do for CBN, for a really informative report there, telling us the truth and telling us what it's like to be a Christian believer in an area which is so persecuted. So tremendous to hear the truth, but this is the truth that we need to understand and we need to be prayerful about, because these are our brothers and sisters, and one day we will be with them in eternity, but it's important for us to be fighting for their right to persist, if that's the right word, but to practice their faith in what is a very, very difficult situation, and more difficult than most of us realize. Because just the statistics you've been giving, when you talk about 54.5 million, that's around about the size of our nation here. Yeah. And then again, it's around about 10% who are believers, Christians, and yet we don't get many reports of how much they're being persecuted in their own nation. We did, like we talked about earlier, we hear about the Muslims having to escape and go into Bangladesh from Myanmar, but there's not that much talked about the Christian side of it, and yet they are probably the most heavily persecuted of the minority groups in the land.
Yeah, that's very, very correct. Global Christian Relief, one of these very important aid agencies, has reported that it's hard to feel Burmese if you are not a Buddhist here, and harder when the military government views your faith and your tribe as subversive, according to a persecuted Christian pastor among the Chin people. Christian persecution in Myanmar has been apparent among minorities, and they've long been the victims of discrimination from the government and the culture. Since the military coup of 2021, violence against Christian minorities has spiked, not that it was particularly low previously, especially as much of the country has revolted in protest. The civil war has displaced 2 million people. It has killed at least 30,000 so far, with Christians being routinely caught in the crossfire. Over 70 churches having been firebombed in the Chin state alone, with pastors killed and Christian villages earmarked for bombing. The most high-profile Christian prisoner is Reverend Haklam Sampson, who was accused merely of holding a prayer meeting with members of the opposition National Unity government. For this act of incitement, the former head of the Kachin Baptist Convention, who had prayed in the White House for then President Trump at that time, and now President again, but this is going back to before 2020, was sentenced to 6 years in prison in 2023. Wow. Other Christians face multiple sources of persecution as well, and including Muslim background believers among the Rohingya who we were speaking of. And that Muslim minority has been pushed out of the Regan state since 2017 by the army. There's terrible atrocities tantamount to genocide that's going on in that region. But Christians who are among the Rohingya are similarly facing extreme persecution because they have left Islam. It's important in this to hear personal stories from individuals, and Open Doors is a fantastic ministry that is routinely getting those personal stories out at great risk. These people are willing to share their testimony. Here is Ko Ong risking everything to follow Jesus in Myanmar.
Soon after the coup started, there were many protests all over the places around Myanmar. When COVID started, the believers in those areas had a hard time, so I supported them with basic daily needs. When the military came near our village, I dare not stay at my home. They started tracking me. They blocked my mobile banking, and they flagged my NRC. I kind of lost my national identity. I was afraid that at any time they would find out where I was and arrest me, or even worse, kill me. there were many sleepless nights and my health was deteriorating day by day. I might be in the wanted list in Myanmar, so I have to hide my accurate location. In big cities, they installed many cameras, trying to adopt the smart city project with face recognition software. If I was deported to Myanmar, surely I would be accused of many crimes and sent to jail. I want to continue supporting the Christians. So, my dream is, when the coup ends, I will go back to Myanmar.
These are difficult stories to hear, but this is the truth of what's going on in the land there, and we need to be aware of it. And we need these guys. Are, you know, as I'm watching that, I'm thinking of the words that that Moses speaks to Joshua: "Be strong and courageous." You know, and these guys are being strong and courageous, and they're keeping their faith. I remember having a conversation with people in a nation where Christians are so persecuted, but when they get to know Christ, they are absolutely full on. They don't in any way back off. They don't retreat, because they know eternity. And this you can see from the messages that we've just heard, the reports, the testimonies that we're giving. These people are facing so much persecution, but they know what is the truth. And the truth is that they have an eternal salvation, and they have been absolutely the reward for their faithfulness is heaven, and therefore they will not give that up. But we need to pray and support them in our prayers and stand with them, and if there's any way of getting encouragement to them, let's do it, because you know we all know there are times in our lives as Christians where we need somebody to just come in with a word or a smile or whatever it is, or a touch on the shoulder. Well, you know, maybe we can't do that in the natural, but spiritually we can ask the Lord to really bless them and continue to keep. I love that scripture. It's one of my favorites in Ephesians 6 verse 10. I'm strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. You know, giving him all the glory, but praying that over our brothers and sisters who are facing terrible persecution, terrible conditions, but they are still remaining so faithful to their God.
Yeah, very definitely, Alistair. Religious nationalism is held as the primary source of persecution, with the military junta being essentially a Buddhist entity that is seeking to suppress anything that is not Buddhist, essentially. And so, hence, in the past year alone, Myanmar has risen 4 places on Open Doors World Watch list, with persecution in church life having the most significant increase. It's now considered in the extreme category of persecution scores, and you know, there's no ceasefire in sight. It's war is continuing to wage and to rage across the country. And the military government conducting a nationwide census to prepare for elections in 2025 enforced mandatory conscription under the People's Military Service Law, leading to many Christians leaving the country, particularly young people, creating a lack of youth in some Christian communities as well, which is putting further pressure on this beleaguered community. A very dear friend of mine for many years, who's one of my oldest friends in the United Kingdom, is a pastor who, when I first met him, was a refugee from Burma, part of the Quran people group, and has served as an evangelist and as a pastor over the years in both the Quran community and now in a mixed multicultural community in Grace Baptist Church, North Watford. His name is Daniel Shui. I was able to sit and have a chat with him over his own experience in growing up in Burma, his own experience of persecution as a follower of Jesus Christ there, and how we can be continuing to pray for the ongoing situation that is transpiring there.
I was born in Burma. Burma or Myanmar is dominated by Buddhism, and I was born in a Christian household in a Korean ethnic. And as I recall, we are, because of our ethnicity and religion, we were oppressed by the people, the Burmese people, and also I left from Burma 34 years ago, and because of political turmoil, which took place in 1988 when I was in university. As I mentioned before, Buddhism is the main religion, and also the Burmese junta, they also attempt to promote Buddhism, especially and to places where ethnic people groups live, by force and by power, and they trying to confuse, discourage people who are very simple, uneducated, to leave from Christianity and to believe in Buddhism. Friend of mine, he left from Christianity because of the force by the military junta. Some places they are trying to arrest pastors, and some places they also burn churches down, and so people had to leave from their villages. Just want to ask to pray for the Burmese people and who believe in false religions to turn away from their idols and worshipping and to the true living God. Just pray that the Lord will draw them to Himself by His power, by His Spirit. And also pray for our brothers and sisters in Burma, that they will have freedom of speech. And recently I heard that many evangelists and pastors, they were stopped by the authorities not to speak the gospel on the streets, at people's doors, and just pray that the Lord will open the door for them so that they may have freedom, and especially to share the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
I really do thank God for people like Pastor Daniel who are telling the story. And you know, it's not easy, even though they're in this nation now where they're fairly secure. We know that there are ways people can try and shut down people who are bringing the truth. But you know, God is for him. And if God is for him, who can be against him? You know, the scriptures from Romans 8:31, we need to release that over people who have come out and told the story. But it is very, very important for us to realize that these things are going on, and we need to take our part in supporting and praying for the nation, because You know, I think there's a misconception, and I know I've talked to people, when you talk about Buddhism to people, they think of it as being a very peaceful religion, you know, and, you know, so many Westerners want to be involved in that because they think of it as a peaceful religion. But when you find out the truth of what's going on in their own land and how they're not peaceful towards anyone who comes against their ideology, it'll shock you, it'll surprise you, but it's the reality. And for us as believers, we need to make it known, because I have many friends from going back in many years and decades before who would always talk about Buddhism as being this wonderful religion where you just sit there and you meditate and so on. But that's not the truth of how it is in their own nations, in Myanmar particularly, where if you come against their ideology, they want to destroy you. They want to rid you from the land. So it's great that you've had an opportunity to meet with this wonderful Pastor Daniel and continue to support him and encourage him in what it must be very trying and testing times. I'm sure he has family back home anyway, maybe.
Since it's, exactly, and since it's independence, 1948, remember, you know, Burma was previously tied to the British Empire, right? Exactly. Since then, it's been in almost constant civil war. So over 75 years of civil war, and it's just very fractious. You know, there was some limited reform, there was some opening up, there was some change a few years back, and then it all went to chaos again. Viewers might want to check a long-standing advocate for the people groups across Burma is Benedict Rogers, and he routinely writes for a range of publications and Christian publications about this. And he speaks of how this plight, Myanmar's plight, is a continual shame to the West, because as often as we've seen in many of the stories we have, there has been colonial impact and impression, and there have been promises made. Britain made particular promises to the people of Burma during the Second World War, and then has essentially surrendered and gone back on those promises. And so you have people who have advocated in Parliament, in the House of Lords as well. Baroness Cox has commented on many an occasion in relation to Burma and Myanmar, but there's been very, very little done to actually advocate for Burma's Christians and to try to see a meaningful, lasting peace in that beleaguered country.
I mean, there's the generation that follows after the Second World War, and then there was the Burmese War. I can remember that as a young kid. That was quite a severe war there. And that generation understands how important it is to stand with people and help to rebuild a people group. But then 2 generations go on, and the promises made just get forgotten. But it's important for us to, as Christians, you know, a promise is a promise, and we need to keep our word. You know, God expects us to do that. And if we can't do much on the ground level, we can certainly do things on the spiritual level by continuing to be prayerful to the people who are fighting a battle against a larger natural army or a group of people.
Absolutely, and to continue to pray into the situation, particularly for Christian leaders, that they would have wisdom and strength, that they would be emboldened in these days, and that they would know the grace of God, and that they would know the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. Continue to remember the people of Myanmar in prayer and ask that God would help them and heal their land.